Good afternoon, and welcome to the Research Breakdown series titled Human Subjects versus Participant Payment. My name is Tiffany Willoughby, Research Education Programs and Outreach Manager in the Office of Research at the University of Texas at Dallas. I will be your moderator. Joining me today to deliver the period of instruction and answer audience questions are Emily Lacy, Associate Director in the Office of Sponsored Projects, Cindy Sutton, Associate Director of Research Financial Operations, and Natasha Hinton, Assistant Director of Research Financial Reporting. Emily Lacy, Associate Director, Sponsored Projects, has been at UTD for 10 years. Prior to UTD, she spent 5 years in the Central Research Office and 1 year in the Corporate and Foundation Relations Office at University of North Texas. Cindy Sutton, Associate Director, Research Financial Operations, has been a UT Dallas employee for over 30 years. She has devoted the last 10 in the Office of Research. Natasha Hinton, Assistant Director, Research Financial Reporting, has worked for UTD for over 12 years. She's been with Research for 8 years. Welcome, Emily, Cindy, and Natasha.
All right, so thank you everyone for joining us on today's presentation. So we thought it would be helpful to go through the differences between a research assistant, a participant cost, and a human subject. And really, participant support cost is probably the most confusing budget category that exists. And while everything in sponsored projects is an answer of it depends, there are some clear distinctions between them. And so that's kind of what we're going to hit on is what can you ask in order to reach the right category? And so what you're seeing right now on my screen is a document that is available on our website. And then I have an additional document that we'll also be sending out afterwards to everyone who is on the call so that you can look at it at your leisure. This document in particular is kind of like a flow chart where you can ask yourself questions, and depending upon the answer, then you know where to categorize things. And so the first category is research assistants, which is the easiest category because it's an employee. This is a student who is going to school at UTD and then is also employed. So they are going to be paid a salary and they're going to have fringe benefits. They're going to get a W-2. They are paid off of, in PeopleSoft, it's C5032. They are on an EPAR. That's what authorizes their payments. They are going to get a performance evaluation. If they don't show up to work, there are consequences. They have specific deliverables they're supposed to do with their job. It's a regular employee, so it's much easier to figure out if something is a research assistant. This category will also have IDC associated with it. And so that's the main gist of a research assistant. So after that, we're going to move over to subject payment because it's a little bit easier than participant support cost. So a human subject is just that. That is someone who is doing something in order to benefit a project. So we are learning from them pretty much. They could be taking part in a survey and we are looking at the results of that survey. They could be in an MRI machine getting some scans, or maybe they are wearing some electrodes and we're collecting data through that way. It doesn't necessarily have to be for a research project. It could be a class project as well, but this is a human subject. So we are learning from them. They are giving us information that we are then using for our project. Because they are humans, they will have an IRB associated with them. We aren't able to do any human subject research without an IRB. And that IRB is to minimize the risk and let them know what exactly is going to happen so that they're well aware of it. So one thing that post-award will do is they will check to make sure that there is an IRB on file before we actually pay the human subjects. And so the human subjects, I'm going to scroll down just a little bit. Human subjects are going to be in PeopleSoft code C6903, and they are generally going to be budgeted under the sponsor other direct cost category. And that is because there's not a specific human subject category on most sponsor budgets. In our internal budget template, we have included a category where it says human subject payments so that you can include them on there. And the key about human subjects is that IDC does apply. So it's very important that you put them in the right category because in just a moment, we're going to talk about participant support costs where IDC does not apply. And so you have to make sure that you are getting the right category each time. Okay, so that is a human subject. Now we're going to move on to the participant support cost. So a participant is kind of the opposite of a human subject. So the human subjects, we were learning from the participants. We were gathering information from them to use in our project. Whereas a participant, we are imparting knowledge on them. We are giving them information. So this would be like a conference, a symposia, a workshop, or a training project. The best example I can give is we have some projects where they, teachers, we go and we have local agreements with some of the ISDs and we teach the teachers something, usually in the summertime. Like maybe we'll teach them a different way of teaching math, and then they go out to their class and they teach it. They are learning from us. We are giving them some new knowledge, and then they are going out to the broader community and disseminating it. And so for that reason, they are a participant and not a human subject, because we are giving them knowledge, they are not giving us knowledge. Now, they may go out and once they distribute it, maybe we'll ask them follow-up questions just to see how impactful the actual training was, but the intent of it is for us to give them the knowledge. And so that is a participant. The other key thing about participants is this bottom line, the rebudgeting of funds. Participant support costs cannot be rebudgeted, and that is for every sponsor. And the reason for that is because they want to know that you are using those funds in the manner that you said you were going to, because this is more of a community outreach, broader impact type of activity. And so be very, very careful about your budget and make sure you've actually thought through all of your costs. Don't use estimates and don't say, I think it's going to be this much. You need to actually sit down and map out your costs, because once those costs are in the budget in these categories and participant support costs, they cannot be moved without asking for permission. And so you need to really think through all of the costs and have quoted them out and priced them out. You can move funds into participant support costs. You just can't move them out of participant support cost. The other part of the participant support category is this REUs. So REU is a specific NSF program that is called Research Experience for Undergrads. And they look at this as a training project where the undergrads are just coming into a lab and learning what it's like to do research. They're learning what a lab is like, what kind of things can they do in the lab. If it's something that they're going to like, it's really meant to incentivize them to go on to graduate work in a lab. And so it's a training project, so it fits a participant support cost rather than an RA, because they're not an employee. They are simply there to learn. We are imparting knowledge upon them. We go back to that. And so if you submit an REU, the solicitation will be very specific in that it will say all of the costs must be under participant support costs. And that's why. It's because it's a training project and not an employee-employer relationship. I'm going to scroll down just a little bit so you can see that the participant support costs, they are paid off of the PAF, which is just like an RA, except that the employee relationship is not there. That's just the method that they're being paid. And in PeopleSoft, they'll be under C7010. So under participant support costs, there are 4 subcategories. So there's the participant support cost for stipends, which this would be if you are giving somebody basically you're incentivizing them to participate. So for the teacher example, if we're going to pay them $50 a day to come and participate in our workshop. The other category is travel. So if they needed funds to get here, like you're going to reimburse them for mileage or bus fare, or if you're putting together a conference, you could offer some sort of travel subsidy for their airfare, something along those lines. The third subcategory is subsistence, which is food. If you are having a workshop or anything of that nature and it's an all-day workshop, you can't just starve them for the entire day. You'll have to feed them in some manner. You can either give them an allowance to go get some food, or you can provide the food. And so that's what the subsistence is for. And then the fourth subcategory is kind of the catch-all. So it's other. And that one is where I think probably the most questions come from, because there's not really a good definition of what is a participant support cost other. Some people use it for like t-shirts, like they'll give a t-shirt to all the participants and they include that. Some of the sponsors are more specific about there can't be any kind of supplies or anything. It boils down to what you submit. If you submitted something with lots of supplies for the particular participants and t-shirts and prizes and things, if you submitted that in your budget under participant support costs and that's how it was awarded, then that's how we can pay it out. but I would encourage you to really think through all those costs, because if you add in special things like t-shirts and things after the fact, it may not get approved as a participant support cost because that doesn't really meet the definition. But it depends on what the sponsor approves. And so that's where our it depends answer comes in. So I'm going to switch over to this other document that I have, and this is specifically from NSF. I'm going to scroll up to the top, hopefully not make anyone nauseous. So NSF is the organization that has the most in terms of participant support costs, and that's because of the REU program, but also just they have more workshops and things like that. And so they get the most questions, and they have always been very good about providing us with some resources and some FAQs. And so this will be sending out to you after the presentation, so you kind of have a way of looking at it. But they answered some of the most common questions, and so I wanted to go through a couple of them. So let me scroll back down. So the first question is, can I include conference speaker fees as participant support costs? And the answer to that is no. And that's because a speaker is not a participant. They're not participating. They're a trainer. They are imparting the knowledge. They're not gaining from the knowledge. They are actually distributing the knowledge. And so they are not considered to be a participant. They would probably be categorized as like a consultant if they were an outside person, or an employee if they were an internal one, but they would not be considered a participant support. And then the second question is, we would like to rebudget out of the participant support category. You can do that, but you have to have prior approval. And so you would have to explain what was different about your project that is not going to enable you to spend your funding the way that you anticipated. And so that's why it's very important that you budget correctly, because if you just have surplus funds and you want to move them out, there's no guarantee that they're going to approve that. So you really have to think about what your costs are and plan accordingly. And like I said, you can move funds into participant support costs without approval. You just can't move them out. So if you rebudgeted and you put some extra funds into participant support costs, those are now those costs. And so even if that wasn't originally budgeted like that, now that they're there, we would have to ask permission to move them. And then the third one is, how should student employees be budgeted? This kind of goes back to our first category in our first worksheet I showed you, where it was research assistants. Student employees are not participants, they're employees. They're doing their job. They are working on the project, and so they are not a participant. A participant is simply there to learn. They are not there to do a job. They are not there to take surveys. They are not there to hand out refreshments. They are there to learn if they are a participant. And the next question is, are costs such as room rental fees, catering, supplies, etc. considered participant costs? So this is kind of the other category that I was referring to earlier. And NSF says no. They say, no, you shouldn't put this type of stuff under participant support costs. And this is where it can get a little bit tricky, and especially when it comes to the supplies, because we have seen it both ways. And it really is just dependent upon how you budgeted it. If you really feel strongly that it needs to be in supplies, we can put it under there and see if they'll approve it. Sometimes they'll come back and they'll ask us to move it out of participant support costs. But we go back to the philosophy of, if it was awarded that way, then we can extend it that way. And so when we make your budget, we will more than likely ask that those kinds of costs not be considered participant support costs, because NSF has specifically said they are not. I'm going to scroll up to the top here. Do the participant support costs apply for all participants, or do they only apply for non-awardee organization participants? They are all participants. It doesn't matter if these people are at UTD or not. If they are a participant, then they are coded as a participant. Now, they cannot be an RA and a participant, because you need to separate the two, if they are, whether they are an actual RA working on the project or whether they are a participant participating in the project. You would need to categorize those differently. They should not be both. They should be one or the other, but it doesn't matter where the participants are. Next question is, may human subjects that are being paid as survey takers be considered participants? And no, they are there doing a job. They are doing human subject research. They are not a participant. They are learning from the participant, so they are a human subject. So that is where they would need to be categorized, not as a participant, because they are not learning. And then here is the REU category. So we're preparing an REU. Is it acceptable to categorize students as both employees and participants? So this is what I was talking about, where they cannot be both. You have to separate the two and make the distinction as to which is being performed at that particular time. And an REU, there shouldn't be RAs on an RAU. An RAU is meant to be a participant project because that is the goal of the project, is to a training project to train those undergraduates. The goal is not to make them an employee. So you would not have any RAs on an RAU submission. I think that's all I had. Cindy and Natasha, do y'all have anything that you would like to add?
One thing I want to add, when you are paying expenditures on your project and it's set up for participant support under C7010, if you notice when the expenditures hit and they are coded as travel or M&O and they are related to that participant support, an IDT will need to be processed to correct the account code. So the expense is coded properly, but that is part of the account reconciliation that you need to look for to ensure that the appropriate account's being used. So that I know Lucian asked the question about the account codes. Both accounts 70101 and 70007 roll up to C7010. When you appoint the RAU or the participant on the project through the payroll system, the job code is going to be S00921 for participant support, and the expense account that is tied to it is 70101. There are instances, depending on if it's like Emily mentioned, where there's other people attending that are coded or being paid as participants, they could be paid as 70007 through the procurement system. So.
I made one more comment, is that I mentioned IDC a little bit, but I don't think I went into too much detail on it. So participant support cost is exempt from IDC, whereas human subjects are not. And so if you accidentally think of your human subject as a participant and submit your budget that way, and then you get permission to rebudget it to the correct one, you will be short. There will be a deficit because the IDC will then be added onto the human subject payment. And so it's important to get them in the right category simply because of the IDC. Now, if you went from a human subject payment which has IDC and moved it into the participant support cost, you wouldn't have that problem because the IDC that was already entered on it would not be applicable on the participant support cost, so you would actually have a surplus. But if you go the opposite way from a participant to a human subject, you will be short on funds, and that's why it's really important to understand what exactly you are wanting for these particular people and what category they fit to make sure it's right from the very beginning.
And the attendee is seeking clarification and to find out what the account code is for travel and the account code for subsistence, please.
If it's related to the participant support, then they'll use a 70101 account.
Thank you, Natasha.
And if you have any suggestions for how we can make this document, especially the one that we have on the screen, more helpful to you, please let us know. We tried to include what category in PeopleSoft, as well as what category on the actual budget and the paperwork that you would need in order to get the individuals paid. And so if there's anything else that we're missing on this, or if you find anything that would be good for us to add, please send it our way. We're happy to increase the amount of information on it in order to make it the most helpful. It seems easy when you're just talking about it. It's when you actually have to put it into practice it gets very confusing.
Emily, Natasha, and Cindy, thank you for sharing your time and knowledge with the attendees. Audience, thank you for attending today's session. To view a full list of Office of Research events, visit research.utdallas.edu. Thank you and have a nice afternoon.